I am Graham, a trucker who reads a lot of books. My goal is to be a full-time author and illustrator. You're helping me get there by watching this video, so thanks. Now on to the video. Okay, with the arrival of Destro number 5 this week, all of the Skybound G.I. Joe miniseries are wrapped up, and the main series will start next week. I really liked 2 of these series. I thought a middle one was okay until the very end, and then the last one, the Scarlet book, I've been very critical of. I thought I would give a brief summary of each series and the issues in them to explain what worked so well about some and what didn't work very well about the Scarlet one. In Duke, we're following up on a storyline from the Transformers comic where Duke was a passenger in a fighter jet that got attacked by a Transformer, by Starscream, and what was it? Skywarp. No, I'm pretty sure it was Starscream. Anyway, they tried to eject, and Starscream killed Duke's friend, and then Duke got away. And in this one, like he starts out like reporting to a superior, to Colonel Hawk, saying, you know, it was a robot. Somebody made a military robot, and it killed Frost, and I want justice for him. And they tell him, stand down, don't worry, like this is nothing, but I think he might just be cracking or whatever. And he's like, no. So he starts conducting his own operation, his own investigation into figuring out what the heck is going on. And so Colonel Hawk hires a couple of other operators to arrest Duke and bring him in. So in the second issue, Duke's hunters capture and arrest him. They take him to the pit. It's a G.I. Joe base where he's locked up in a cell next to the Baroness, who is famously a Cobra operative. In the third issue, various Joes clash as Duke attempts to break out of the pit, and then he's forced to team up with the Baroness to succeed, but she immediately double-crosses him for the bounty on his head. And so in the fourth issue, Duke has to convince the Baroness to switch loyalties and help him escape. The Baroness there on the motorcycle. There's a cool scene where he's flying a fighter jet, and there's like other allies of his that are busting out in like tanks and ridiculous G.I. Joe vehicles. They steal this fighter jet. They fly to a Mars Industries facility where there are rumors of robot soldiers being built. Mars Industries is a weapons manufacturer run by a Cobra villain named Destro. And Duke thinks that Mars might have made the Transformers. And then in the fifth Duke issue, he faces off against Destro, who's the leader of Mars. Like I said, he learns that the battle android troopers, the ones that Destro makes, those are not Transformers. Duke gets into a fist fight with one of the bats and beats it in a really cool scene, and then he escapes. But in the conflict, that particular Mars facility burns down, and Duke is presumed dead. But he's at the hospital later recovering, and Colonel Hawk is like, okay, we're reinstating you. We're putting you in charge of a Joe team at the pit. We found out intel about these transforming robots you were talking about. They're becoming a bigger problem. We believe that you are the man for this job. And so that ends the Duke arc, and it gets the Joes set up for the most part. With the Cobra Commander book, it starts out in a place called Cobra Law. I don't know much about this aspect of G.I. Joe lore. It's kind of this weird place where everybody's like some kind of snake person. He's not quite Cobra Commander yet. We're not told what his name is. I think it's one of those things where you don't know his name and you don't ever know his face. He's just always Cobra Commander and wearing a mask. The main takeaway from this is that he's got Megatron locked up in a facility somehow, and he's been studying him. He's been learning about robots out in space and stuff, and he's like, oh crap, we need to level up and get more power here on Earth. And from Megatron, Cobra Commander is able to learn like how to detect energon, and he finds sources of it on Earth. So he goes to check it out, and he finds a source of energon in a Cajun swamp, but it's under the control of a gang called the Dreadnoks. He gets in a fight with them, gets tuned up, they capture him, and they start like torturing him and interrogating him. He's able to use his superior psychology to trick them all into fighting each other. And then he escapes, and he finds, nope, that's Destro. He escapes, and he finds their secret laboratory where they've got a scientist working on the energon. But now that he's found it, Cobra Law sends their guy Nemesis to come and kill Cobra Commander, to double-cross him. That's all that they wanted him to find. But he's able to escape because he is the absolute governor, and he takes the scientist and goes and meets with the buyer for the energon that he was developing. And it turns out it's Destro from Mars Industries. Knowing that, it makes sense why they would then go into a Destro book. Cobra Commander and Destro have worked together, but it's kind of like a Megatron and Starscream thing where they're ready to betray each other. Destro wouldn't mind like going behind Cobra Commander's back. The Destro book, I would have given it 3 stars all the way across the board until it got to issue 5, and then like it all came together really, really strong, and it made a lot more sense. So I was like, okay, cool. this one makes it all worth it. As we've established, Destro is the CEO of Mars Industries. It's a weapons manufacturer, but he's also got a competing entity to deal with called Extensive Enterprises. That's run by the twins Tomax and Zaymot. They get into a big bloody engagement, and a bunch of Tomax and Zaymot's soldiers die, and a bunch of Destro's battle android troopers get blown up. So they meet together and they decide, like, okay, we're not going to do open conflict. We're going to fight by other means, and one of us is going to bankrupt or destroy the other, and whoever wins gets to absorb the other company. We want low collateral. They say, okay, we can agree to that. So Destro leaves and he goes and retreats to like some ancestral Scottish fortress of his. But it's not as secret as he thought it was, and an assassin named the Chameleon is sent to take him out. So he's injured, he's on the run, and he ends up hiding out with some American military after that, and proposes a working relationship with them. But really, he needs their resources and their intel so that he can make his next move. Destro is a fighter. He is a CEO. He's also a cunning villain and a thinker. In the fourth issue, he tracks down Chameleon, and much like Cobra Commander, he's able to use psychology to trick her to his side. She tells him that there's this satellite network that can effectively hold the whole world hostage if the wrong person has control of it. So that's bad. But by the end, that puts all of the pieces on the table so that Destro is able to, again, have an open conflict with Tomax and Zaymot, but he also arranges for Cobra Commander to be there to be present. And not only does he beat Tomax and Zaymot with military assets, he also beats them psychologically. And in the end, like, they all develop this working relationship, which will form the basis of what we know to be Cobra. So Cobra Commander will be in charge, Destro will provide weapons, so will Tomax and Zaymot, and now we have our villains established in much the same way that we had the Joes established by the end of the Duke book. Now we get into Scarlet, which is a bit of a frustrating treatment here. This is probably the most frustrating book out of all of this. Duke and Cobra Commander were both written by Joshua Williamson. Dan Waters did Destro, Kelly Thompson did Scarlet. And I have this feeling like Waters and Williamson got together and they're like, okay, we're going to put our heads together. Here's where our stuff's going to overlap. Here's where it's going to be connected. And Kelly Thompson was just like not in that meeting for whatever reason, or if she was, like, she just didn't care, because the Scarlet book is not only not connected to this larger narrative, it's barely connected to the Energon universe at all. I think they mention Energon once or twice, and at the end, Storm Shadow gets this sword that looks like it could be made of Energon. Other than that, nothing. But if we're setting the table for a G.I. Joe book and getting all the factions out there, the Scarlet book is the way that they're getting the Arashikage Ninja Clan in there. In this case, Scarlet is a deep cover operative. She's sent to infiltrate the Arashikage, but she's nervous because her roommate, definitely not her girlfriend, just her roommate, haha, they're just friends, Jinx, has already been on a 2-year undercover mission with the Arashikage, and it's very dangerous. If they're ever found out, they'll get killed by super ninja swords and stuff. So obviously she's concerned about that, but like the way that it's written, it's just overly pining. This isn't just like, oh, I get to see my friend and make sure she's okay. It's like, oh, it takes my breath away. I'm like, what is this? What is going on? But the first issue, Scarlet is sent on that mission. The second one, she's successful on her infiltration, and she is sent to compromise a weapon that belongs to the Arashikage but has been stolen by a rival. So she goes and easily infiltrates that facility at the very end. In this third book, she's joined by Jinx, and they have some talky emotional stuff, and they beat up a bunch of people. Pay attention to this shoulder tattoo on Jinx. It's going to be relevant in a minute. In the fourth book, Scarlet and Jinx are then joined by Storm Shadow. They're still in the same facility. They're still doing the mission that she got in the second book, that she started at the end of the second book, and that she's been doing this entire time. They're joined by Storm Shadow. He finds the powerful, maybe Energon sword. And then at the end, they're still at this facility that she got to all the way back at the end of this one. And then she escapes. She briefly meets up with another Joe contact in Japan. And they talk about how she's going to stay under deep cover with Jinx and Storm Shadow to keep an eye on the Arashikage stuff. And then that's pretty much it. Like, this really would have worked better, in my opinion, if they'd done a Storm Shadow or a Snake Eyes type book, because they've got the more established rivalry, and obviously they got the stronger connections to the Arashikage. I'm not sure what the end goal was of trying to tell this story through Scarlet's eyes while she's also pining for her roommate. But that's been the most disappointing part about all of this is that obviously, like, you see how the other books overlapped, and this is without even me getting into the stuff going on with Void Rivals and Transformers. That's almost a whole other issue there. But all of those books are connected integrally, and this one has almost nothing to do with it. And on top of that, it's just not very well written. Well, remember when I mentioned this bit about Jinx's shoulder tattoo? Last week, Scott Snyder's Absolute Batman #1 dropped, and it was a fantastic read. I'm still thinking about it. DC is doing this Absolute reboot series of their Trinity characters. So there's an Absolute Wonder Woman and an Absolute Superman coming out in November and January, respectively. I'm excited for more of that Absolute stuff, and I hope it works really, really well. I hope that it's a fantastic read. My hesitancy, as I said last week, is that Kelly Thompson is the writer for Absolute Wonder Woman. And I was like, well, if it's going to be the same slog to read through as Scarlett was, like, I don't know if I want to bother. And it's a little like cherry on top. Look at the cover here for Absolute Wonder Woman. Look at the tattoo on her right shoulder. I mean, pattern recognition, right? Like, what is this? Why is this being done? I do want to be a little bit more objective, and like, instead of being frustrated and judging her entire writing off of like one book series, I'm going to give this a shot because it is with a different publisher and it's under a different editor, and hopefully that means that it will be a different treatment than this Scarlett book. But it remains to be seen. So I've got reason to believe that she'll be doing what she did with this book, but I'm going to choose to be optimistic and see if this one's better. But that's more or less a summary of the G.I. Joe leg of the Skybound Energon universe. The first G.I. Joe issue, Volume 1, comes out next month. And so all of the stuff that's happened in these last 20 floppies, or 4 books total, will converge for a more coherent story that will then, or cohesive story, excuse me, that will then connect to Transformers, which is now up to, I think, 14 books. 13 just came out, maybe 14 just came out. And it looks like Void Rivals, which took a month or 2 off, is going to have its next issue come together in, what we got there? November 26th, it'll be out. So let me know what you guys think, if you've been following this, if you had a different experience with it. And yeah, thanks. Thank you for watching that. To help the channel, check out my books on Amazon. Buy one, read it, tell me what you think. For October, I recommend Sleepless Hollow, a fantastic sci-fi romp with guns, ghosts, and gonzo action sequences. You can also subscribe to my Substack, where I do more detailed book reviews and longer-running projects, some of which is paywalled. Drive safe. See you out there.